Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ivan Fiyun, and you are listening and watching the Ministry Media Show, broadcasting always also on the Rainbow Gospel Radio, Missions Radio for the World. In this show, we want to inspire you as a believer, as a Christian, to create content and to communicate in these times that we have. I believe very strongly that there is no such time as right now. And we have a great opportunity to do that. But I have a very interesting guest with me today, Crystal Stoll. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. And we met on a Facebook group where there are creatives and people talking about ministry and media, etc. And I asked Crystal to join me on the show today so she can tell me a little bit about what she does. And I'm going to, obviously, from what she's talking about, I'm going to ask her more questions because I believe this is something that the body of Christ needs to hear and something that the world and especially the church can benefit from. So, Crystal, if you were to share with me your superpower, what would that be?
Honestly, my biggest superpower, probably a critical eye,
Okay.
which is it's incredibly useful. I think too often as churches and ministries, we get so wrapped up in doing things the way they've always been done and doing things kind of, it all becomes kind of mediocre.
Yes.
And I like to come into churches and ministries and even businesses and take a critical look over your digital presence and make sure things are consistent, make sure things are representing who you are as a church, right? Who the churches are like in their personality, and making sure that their digital presence is authentic with their with the church's stated vision and mission and goals and that sort of thing. And then take that a step further and say, okay, so if I'm a first-time guest, if I've never heard of your church before, what would keep me from coming back or pursuing more or connecting with your congregation?
If I introduce myself as a media coach for pastors and ministries, helping them to communicate better, building the media channels to get their message to its intended for, and creating communities around it. So if you were to give me your one-liner, what would it be?
Helping churches and small organizations build the best online community that they can so that they can do the work of Christ in their communities and in the world.
So I can pick up from your presentation there that you're also maybe torn between two worlds where as professionals, we want to really serve the body of Christ, but we also find ourselves, because it comes to us, but sometimes it's needed for us to also work with businesses. Do you find that happening as well?
Honestly, I have worked in both roles. I'm currently serving a church right now. I've served another church in the past, but I've also served in the business world with a small business and a few small businesses actually.
Okay.
And yeah, ultimately my goal is to serve churches and faith-based businesses. So Christian authors, that sort of thing.
Okay.
But yeah, I've done work in the private sector before.
Which one came first? Was it the secular corporate world or was it ministry?
For website design, it was the secular world.
Okay.
But for the social media part of it, and where I really started to get interested in this whole area of connecting with people online, that was in a church. I was a church secretary and had to step into a million roles because the church didn't have a Facebook page and they didn't have an Instagram account. They didn't have any sort of they had a website, but I redesigned that and I just sort of started from where they were.
Right. Um, what is your, let's start with, what does your world look like right now? You spoke to me a little bit on Facebook, and what I picked up also from your previous sentence is that you kind of, did you feel that you fell into this, or because right now you said you are currently working with quite a few churches, and you having that critical eye that I think is very helpful and sobering for most ministries. Is it something that you felt drawn to, or did it just happen?
Well, actually, right now I'm working for one church, and then I'm working with my own church in a volunteer capacity. So not many churches,
Okay.
but yes, I do feel like it's something that once I started looking into it and researching it, because when I first got started, I didn't know anything about any of this.
Yeah.
But I poured, one of the things that I really love to do is just to research things that I'm passionate about. And I poured so much time into researching marketing, um, and church marketing, church leadership, the way the church can reach people beyond its own doors through digital media. So I did pursue it in a way. Um, is that your question?
Yes, yes, definitely. So this is obviously a completely different world. It's a world that I think ministries don't necessarily understand. They know it's needed, especially now, the need to communicate and to create communities, etc. So I think I think we are. I think it sounds like we're very very similar and very alike in terms of assessing and building platforms, and it's very difficult to communicate because you have the senior pastor saying, I know this needs to happen. Please lead the way. Tell us what we need to do. And then you start doing that. And then you get a little bit of friction happening within the organization because this guy was actually supposed to do it. And now we're infringing on his areas and we need to start working together. And I think the communication and the development becomes difficult because I think it's necessary for us to come into that relationship saying, you know what, I'm not here to take anybody's job. I'm not here to be a threat to anybody. I really earnestly just want to help because for me it's a calling and this is what I'm meant to do. So if you guys are open, you know, we can really help just enhance what you're currently doing. Do you find that sometimes?
Yes, I absolutely do. I think one of the bigger roles as a church communicator is not only to serve the greater audience, the community that you're trying to reach, but you also need to serve the ministry leaders within the church, just to be a resource for them, to step in and say, okay, so I'm not here to do anything against you or to supplant you, but I want to reinforce what you're doing. I want to build up what you're doing and allow you to use me as a resource to reach more people with your ministry. I think that's the biggest goal. And one of the problems that I have is, I think as church communicators, we know how things should be. We want things to be a certain way, but the church doesn't move very fast. It doesn't move as fast, even as fast as a business with a big board. Churches just intrinsically, they have so many more moving parts, and to get all of that on board together, it takes longer. So my friction, my tension is, it's okay, I want this to change today. And it just doesn't happen that way. And I think we really need to remember that we're not here to cause a division. And if we try to push too hard for things to change too quickly, that's what's going to happen.
Um, I think it depends on the size of the organization, because I think the bigger that church is, the more moving parts there are and the more decision makers there are. And so, content creation and communication is essentially a policy that has to be managed internally, because we come from outside and we say, okay, what is there at the moment? We suggest this happens, and then that has to filter in through quite a communication process before everybody's comfortable with it.
Yeah, and it absolutely has to come from the top. I mean, I've made this mistake before. The first church that I was in, I just tried to take over, and it didn't. The vision didn't come from the top. It didn't come from the pastor, and so everybody wasn't on board. And I think that's even in a small church. You've got to be able to give the pastor time to share, even if he's the one that's fully on board with you. He still has to be able to just invest that vision into his church, and that can take time. But that doesn't mean that we stop working in that time, right? We keep going, and we do what we can, and just understanding that perfection or excellence doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, just like social media is a process. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're not going to see results overnight, and you're not going to get a church on board overnight.
I've actually found recently, well, not recently, I've been doing it for a couple of years. I actually go straight to the top and communicate with the senior pastor if I've got his ear. If I don't have his ear, then I ask, can I please meet with the senior pastor? Because if the vision can be sold up there, it can be filtered down through the organization, the communication channels, because you're essentially an outsider coming in. And you have to break through so many, what is essentially trust barriers. But if the senior pastor says, listen, this is Ivan or Crystal, please follow them and let them guide you through the process, everyone is sure we'll definitely do it.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me what you're currently looking at? What is happening in your world right now? What are you busy with?
Right now, I'm trying to just launch what I've been doing from a side gig that was paying a little bit of extra money for my family into more of a full-blown business. So I'm completely wrapped up in. Last night I launched my Facebook business page. I'm putting together my website, trying to get some content put together, that sort of thing, so that I'm drawing in more clients. Because my husband and I both lost income due to COVID. So we're trying to kind of think outside the box. Correct. If that makes sense, and revamp what life looks like for our family.
Okay. And are you working on any creative projects with any ministries at the moment?
Yep, I'm currently working with Hope Family Church. Okay. I did in Hutchinson, Minnesota. I did their website, and I'm in charge of their social media.
Okay.
And right now we're trying to figure out how much farther we want to take it. But that's what we're doing right now.
Okay. If you look at all the ministries that you could point to you can say, there's a good example of a ministry doing it well. Do you have anything in mind that you would say, listen, they are doing a great job? That's a good example of where you could go to?
Sure. Eagle Brook. I think, of course, the big ones, Hillsong, Elevation. There's a really little church, and I'm trying to remember their name, but their branding is just so on point. Their target audience is young people, and their brand is like this hot Mary Kay pink. I don't know if you're familiar with the Mary Kay brand, but it's like Mary Kay pink, like popped to a neon, and they're all over Instagram, and they're just really doing. They're a small church, and they don't have a ton of equipment, and they don't have a ton of like performance stuff, but they're really doing social media, I think, really well for what they are.
Which church is
I wish I could remember the name of it.
Okay, if you come across it, let me know.
I
Um,
will.
cool. So which area of the things that you work with, like I can pick up that you're pretty passionate about branding and that communication. Is that it, or is there something else that you like more than that?
Um, so I guess my passion is taking all of the scattered pieces of who your church is online. So a lot of churches, when they try to get online, the first thing they do is they build a website, and then they build a Facebook page, eh, um, and then they start to put out content, but none of it is it's not strategic, right? It doesn't, you may have somebody who started a Facebook page who's not even on staff at the church, and and it doesn't match the website or any of that. So it's far, when we talk about branding, it's far more than just a logo and colors and a church name. It goes much deeper into the tone of your posts and the personality of your church, and who is seen. Um, is it just the pastor, or are you also highlighting your ministries and your people? And here's a spoiler for you: you've got to highlight the ministries, your ministries and your people. That's huge. So are you doing all of those things online, and are they all consistent? That's my big thing. Does your Facebook page, like, personality, does it match your website's personality? Does it match what you're doing on Sunday morning? Are you being true and authentically your church to the online community?
I think that's
That's what's important to me.
I think that's something that maybe maybe we miss as ministries. We know we should be out there, and so sometimes what we do is we have 5 different people working on this thing, and we don't have someone actually guiding it, and so you have 1,000 different messages going out, a bunch of different look, etc. And I think the word that we could probably use here, and this is just the benefit for the audience and the people that's listening or watching, is probably consistency. That is a pretty big word and very important, that people understand brand consistency, not just in design, but also across platforms. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Consistency is huge for me. Um, so one of the, not only do we have so many people in trying to get it into this, but we've also got in a lot of times you have an untrained, it's sometimes even an unpaid worker that's behind all of this, a part-time staff member or a volunteer that hasn't worked in this field before, and they don't really know what they're doing. I mean, that's kind of where I came from. And so what you see is they pull a lot of stuff from the internet that other people are posting, and they just repost it as themselves, which is, there's nothing wrong with sharing, right? But when you're trying to build your own brand and what sets you apart from other churches, um, just replicating what somebody else is doing without putting your own personality into it is, it's going to wind up super scattered, because you're going to wind up looking like a billion other brands, or a billion, and a billion other churches. Um, God called your church for a purpose. He called each and every church into a specific place at a specific time with a specific message for a certain people. And if you're just reposting someone else's content, and that's all you're doing, and throwing up your occasional events, then you're not reaching those specific people. You're not targeting your message to who God has called you to reach. Does that make sense? And so
Yes.
consistency is super important, because we know from statistics and studies that that people have to see your message multiple times before they ever respond to it. And it's got to be a recognizable message. It's got to be content that they see over and over again, so that they can finally start associating this word, whatever it is, with your church. So for example, the church that I'm working with right now, Hope, they have a specific logo and colors and font that they use, but they have a specific message too, that their verse, their foundation verse, is the one about I bring you. Oh my goodness, my mind is going completely blank. But basically, it's the hope, to bring you a hope in a future verse.
Right.
And you know what I'm talking about, in Jeremiah.
Yeah.
And so that's everything that they do is kind of wrapped up in that. And then they have these four core values. And so what I do when I'm planning their social media posts is consistently try to bringing everything back to these four values and their core verse, and specifically addressing the people that they are trying to reach, and then pairing that with their brand elements, their logo, their colors, their font, so that when people see this message of hope, when they see this message of God has a future for me, they associate it with the church, with the church's logo, with the church's colors, so that so that hopefully we build this awareness in the community of who the church is.
Right.
And on top of that is, obviously engaging with your community and bringing all of that to them, so that they actually hear it.
Right. So for those that listening or watching this, what Crystal was talking about just now, we call it content curation. Is when you take some of the content that's online and share it on your platform. Crystal, the question I want to ask you regarding content curation versus my original content that speaks to my brand and my message, what would you say is the ratio for that? Would you use the Parisha principle there, where you say 20% curation and 80% my own? Would it be 100% my own? Because I know, for instance, our church, I've never seen them share anything outside of our organization. Maybe from the associated or the sons in the ministry, from their stuff, they might share one or two, but nothing really outside of that. What is your opinion on that ratio and curating from outside?
So I think it depends a lot on what your people respond to. I mean, you've got to be continually checking your numbers to see what people like. But for the most part, if you're talking about like a certain percentage, we try to really stick to posts that the only thing they do is say come to church. We try to do that maybe only like 10%, and then things that other people that are solely created by other people, maybe only 20%, and then everything else is sermon clips and scripture memes and things that we've created with our own colors and that sort of thing, and discipleship and videos. One of the largest problems that I have with working with small churches is there's not a lot of people that want to go on camera.
Right.
So it's hard to get live video. It's hard to get discipleship and ministry stories. But that's one of the things. That's the biggest area of improvement that I'm looking at for probably the next year. But yeah, most of it I would say is created content. And you have a problem too with Facebook, because anytime you put a link on a Facebook post, the reach goes way down, right? Okay. Because Facebook doesn't want you to go off of the platform. They want to keep you there.
That's correct.
So it's really difficult to share things that other people have created without losing some of that reach. But I do think that every once in a while you find something really important that needs to be shared. And if you can do that in a way that 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 benefits your audience. So for instance, when I'm looking at Instagram and I'm seeing all these posts from other churches that in other ministries that our church is, I guess, sort of looks up to or
We're
follows,
inspired by.
respects.
Mm.
When we see something like that, I'm always trying to filter it in the sense of, okay, what is our church talking about right now? What is our ministry trying to share right now? Does this fit in with that, or does it detract from that? Because it might be a really, really great message, but if it's not on point to what we're trying to share right now, it's going to make things a little more scattered and muddy.
This morning I was creating content for a course of mine, and one of the things I was talking about is find, there's certain content. You were mentioning video just now. There's content that you're comfortable with. And so I want to always inspire a ministry to go beyond their comfort zone, because that's also a message right through the Bible. Is like Moses, he was comfortable where he was stuttering, he didn't want to move past that. And lots of biblical examples where people are like, I'm happy where I am now, I don't want to do that and that. And so I'm always, especially this morning in that content, I was saying, see if you want to go past your comfort zone. Your comfort zone might be, I love doing audio because obviously I'm speaking in church, and they can literally just take that audio clip and rework it into something else, and it could become a podcast or something. Or as a ministry, you like writing. You might be writing articles and journals and that kind of stuff. Or on the other hand, you could just maybe like creating visuals or animations or whatever. But at the end of the day, for me, the primary and best content that you can create is video, because video can go really wide, and I can take the video and I can repurpose it. So video, I can go and, convert it to audio. I can take that and it can be transcribed. So it becomes writing. It could become a blog post, or I can transcribe it for course material later on, whatever. I can take really brilliant sayings out of the videos, and I can create what we call quote cards, where it's like a quote and there's a picture of it. It becomes visual content. There's so much that you can do. And every time that you escalate up to video, the video is for me the primary kind of content. If you create anything but video, you kind of de-escalate your platform, because if you do text, you don't have audio unless you go and read it out. If you have just pictures, it's great and powerful, but it's really limited in what it can do unless you go and create a slideshow of that. But then you still have to go and put an extra effort. And we've actually developed a method where I can spend a day in production with a team. And so the time, a lot of times for a pastor, it's about how much time is this going to take me. I think that a lot of time is the reservation, because they don't have a lot of that, right? And so, if you prepare them and say, okay, we're going to talk about this, etc., and you let them deliver content that's already inside of them. Like, you don't have to go and research things, etc. It's like, what is the core scripture that you believe in? Why is it important? And build on that. They go spend a day in studio. I've seen that we can get about 3 months worth of content just out of that if we go in post-production and use the process that I shared right now. So is that the reason why you favor video above everything else?
Because it does lend to itself. It's so flexible. Yes, absolutely. And you can do so much with it. You can send it over to YouTube and then embed it in your website, and it does so much for you in terms of SEO. And keywords. It's incredible. I think not only, and it's not just a technical side or a logistical side, but people connect with people, right? They don't connect with flashy words or or really beautiful graphics. They want to see stories of life change. They want to see stories of, you know, how has this church helped me? How has God helped me? Um, what is this faith thing all about, really? And they're not going to read a big long book about it necessarily, but they will take the time to watch a 5-minute video about why your faith matters to you, or what, or you sharing what Jesus has done in your life, because that human connection is so important, because people relate so much to stories. I mean, even Jesus told stories. It was his primary
all
method
the
of
time,
teaching,
all the time.
right? And so we need to share those stories that are in our churches. That's the biggest reason to use video. I think far more than, is it flexible? Is it easier for us? Yes, it is. But the biggest reason is because that's what draws people. It's attractional. And the church has to be attractional. It has to be missional, absolutely. But it also has to be attractional. You can't have one without the other. Jesus, people didn't follow him because he shared these big, wordy sermons theologically. I mean, he did teach, but a lot of times they didn't fully grasp what he was saying. They came to him because, you know, he was attractional. He healed their sick. He fed them. He loved them, and he told them stories in a way that they understood. Um, it wasn't the uh, big theological, heady, intelligent messages that drew people. It was stories of real people just like them. And that's what the church needs to share, and video is the best way to do it.
So I love what you're saying there, and that's maybe something that we can learn from him. Is he made really deep theological truths simple by telling relatable stories which people can place themselves into. We actually, in networking and in marketing, we have a saying: stories, facts tell, stories sell. And so I can say, you know, last week we had 30 people give their lives to Christ. That sounds great. But imagine I go and post and I record a testimony of a guy that gave his life to Christ maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and tell the story of what's been happening since then. That is really a great way to sell you know, your ministry and the impact and what you're doing, etc. Obviously, also the missions work that you're doing, the welfare, telling those stories. But I want to ask you this question: do you think that telling the stories and the testimonies is more powerful than, for instance, if I have a series where I'm teaching on leadership, or I teach people basic principles like the gifts of the Spirit or that kind of thing? If that were content on my platform, or I were just to do interviews with, hey, this is Pastor Andre and this is what his department is. What are you guys doing in your department? That kind of thing. Does it matter what kind of content it is? Is there something that you favor more than others? Or do you think just content trumps no content?
Well, absolutely, content trumps no content. I mean, we can't just not do anything. But at the end of the day, these two pieces of content that you're talking about, the pastor's sermons and his teaching and all of that, and then stories of life change, these serve two very different purposes. I don't think you can really do well without having both pieces, because the one is going to draw people to you and help them get to know you, and it's going to pull them in. And then the other one is, you know, as they learn to trust you as a church, then you can teach them and disciple them with sermon content and that sort of thing. And I want to be clear about this. I don't think that the way we have always done church is going to survive. I think I think that, yes, people are still going to want to meet in person, but increasingly people are watching from home. They're watching live streams. They're watching church, and to them, they feel like they're going to church, especially if that church is also doing other things online. And so I think that we can't we can't just put up a sermon and say, oh, we're online now. We have to be discipling people where they are, um, where they're comfortable and where they're willing to be. Um, I've lost my train of thought. I don't know where I was going with that, but
Okay. No, I think we're talking about, you know, I think the premise of what you were saying is that the way that we have been doing church and presenting church is definitely changing. And so the model that I clearly see from Scripture is, there were definitely the offices where they were writing letters and teaching others and equipping them for ministry. So I see a big move towards small groups, the concept. Yes, we'll have this one meeting. Jesus had those one meeting all the time. We had the 5,000 and the 3,000, etc. So those congregational gatherings were there, but church was really done where people met and they were going home to home. They were praying together, sharing the word, those kind of things. And I think that's something that we might have missed before, which now becomes crucial. And now we're going to see maybe a little bit of a revival in church happening. And so having said that, what do you think? What have you seen are the opportunities for us to use digital media or tools to facilitate this process of, hey, we can touch more people, because we can really only have so many people in the building. And if that is our capacity, then we've lost. We got to go outside of the walls, essentially, go out into the world, pray and teach the gospel, convert them and make them disciples, equip them for the ministry, etc.
Yep. And I think the tools that you use are going to depend a lot upon your church and who you are trying to reach. So, for instance, a church that is primarily trying to reach younger people is going to use naturally a social media that attracts younger people, TikTok, Snapchat, maybe even Instagram. If your congregation is primarily on Facebook and they're nowhere else, then you use Facebook, and maybe you try to start a community on Instagram in order to bring in a little bit of a younger audience, and grow that aspect of it. But I don't think you try to take your church, your congregation that is not as familiar with social media, and try to get them on TikTok. I don't think that's going to work.
Right.
And certainly there are live streaming tools that you can use, and there's of course equipment and all of that. But at the end of the day, I think this is what I was trying to lead to before. At the end of the day, we always want to strive for excellence, right? We always want to try to reach the most people that are in our target audience with the best content possible. But we can't not do something because it's not perfect, right?
Right.
Small churches especially, you just don't have a big budget for lots of equipment, for lots of tech, for lots of services. And so the best thing that you can do is try to make improvements over time and continue to strive for excellence, but don't stop producing because it's not perfect. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So we're talking about outbound messaging and marketing. And what I want to ask you, Crystal, is with these messages that go out, somehow we got to get people together and to engage with them, because it's not good to just throw the seed out there and it's not being watered. So what do you suggest the church that does communicate outside and maybe miss the element of connection, and that connection is made either through small group, it could be digital, but somehow I touch the person and I'm like, I'm here for you. If you have any questions, here's some programs you can go to, etc. Do you think that element is important? And is the website that I can hear is very important for you, is that a good home for this information to be and for people to go engage, sign up, all those kind of things?
I think it's a great home. I mean, I think beyond just putting information out on social media, I think we need to be continually driving people back to the website, because that's where you can have a place to engage them. And maybe you have a page on your website that says, if this is your first time, here's what you can expect. And if you want a reminder about Sunday morning, give us your email address or your phone number. We can text you on Saturday and remind you to come on Sunday. And that way we can continue to connect. The worst thing that I think that you can, well, besides not doing anything, one of the worst things that I think you can do is just post events and oh, here's our new sermon series, and not
Hold on to that thought. I'm
not
going to get back to that now, because I think that's a very important. I know where you're going, and I want to
okay.
ask you a specific question about that. Before you go into that, we know from our experience on digital that a call to action is very important. So what would you say is the most effective call to action? Is it go to my website and go and look for the connection button or whatever? Or would an app be more effective? We say, go download an app. You can stream the services from there. You can also, there's a way you can connect. There's a social media group. You can go in there. You'll get notifications of all our events, blah, blah, blah. Which one do you think is most effective?
I have to be honest, I haven't looked at apps in quite a while. Probably 5 years ago, or more. When I was researching this and looking into it, people were saying that in the church space, it's not worth it to try and create an app, especially as a small church with few resources, because people don't download apps as much. They want to go onto a website. Now, your website absolutely has to be mobile first. It has to be optimized for mobile, because more and more people are accessing the internet through mobile devices. But I don't think that an app is necessary.
Okay, good. So let's go into that question I wanted to ask you. I've got 5 mistakes that I believe ministries make on social media and media as a whole. Can I ask you, what would you say is your top 3, top 5 mistakes that ministries make on their media channels?
Okay. Using their social media as a billboard is probably the number one thing that I see. Not connecting with people, only sharing things like, okay, we're going to have this event coming up. And that's not just churches that do that. There's a restaurant in my area that's involved in a Facebook group, which is fantastic. But the only thing they ever post in the Facebook group is pictures of their food and a picture of their menu. And it's all just sell, 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 sell. And they post multiple times a day, to the point where I'm like, okay, I don't even want to hear from you anymore. And if that's what we're doing as churches, we're absolutely turning people off.
Amazing.
So that would be the first one. Other mistakes that people are making would be only posting inspirational things. Now, that being said, you post a verse and a graphic, and sometimes it gets more engagement, and sometimes people share it more than they do other things. But if that's all you're posting, again, you're not connecting with people. You're not sharing those heart stories that people are going to engage with. Another mistake that I have made and I see is splashing your logo on everything. And the reason I say that's a mistake, now, your brand should be recognizable. You should be able to do that in colors, in fonts, and in the voice that you use. But if you're splashing your logo on everything, people aren't as willing to share it, because then it looks like it's coming from a business or an organization, not from the person who's sharing it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I think that's probably, those three things are probably the top.
Okay. I
Yeah,
want to I want to share with you my five, and then you tell me what your thoughts are on those. So number
sure.
one, and I love that you said the first one is advertising only. So I'm not saying that advertising is wrong. I'm just saying that advertising only and there's nothing else happening, I think, like you said, is a mistake, because people tune out completely and they're like, I don't even look at that anymore. And so it devalues, you might as well not even be on social media. A lot of ministries, they have Facebook pages, etc., so that they can post their flyer, but it's essentially that, on these channels, and just to get the word out there. And it's not really effective. Would you agree to that? That's right, eh?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
The second one is I think a mistake that ministries make, and we alluded to that earlier, is they don't create content at all. So that's the antithesis of ads. But like I said earlier, and I liked where that came from. Obviously, a little bit of inspiration is any content is better than no content. And so there's so many different opportunities. It depends on your comfort level and what you have, you know. Um, God said to Moses, what do you have in your hand? And he had a staff in his hand. He said, okay, we're going to use that. And so you should look at what you have and then use that. You know, God can do amazing things with a lot of, you know, if you have little of something, God, we've seen that God can do amazing things with that. The third one for me is consistency. So sometimes the church has amazing content and even goes viral. You know, people are like, yes, this was amazing. But they do that once every 3 months or once a month or so on. So I would always say, listen, try, you know, the effort that you put into that one piece of content, maybe divide it up into 4, and instead of creating this big piece of content that's a production piece, essentially take your efforts and do one a week. Even if it's, instead of a 12-minute video that's amazing, let's go and make 4 3-minute videos. And when we look at, I also want to add, when we look at the amount of time and energy it takes to do an advertisement, either in video or a flyer, etc., you can use the same amount of time and create content. In fact, you could possibly get more content out if you use that energy, the resources, the talent that you've used to do that, and you can create content for that. And obviously consistency, we've mentioned it as we opened up today, that consistency is really powerful. And the fourth one for me is community. So we have these platforms, but we don't have a way for those that we are touching in the audience to engage with us in a platform where you can actually engage with you. So it's just outbound and I'm shouting all the time. There's no way for you to come in, feel safe and engaging with you. So community building for me is important, especially online and digital communities. And lastly, very, very powerful that I want to share with the audience is collaboration. So you could do internal collaboration where you use the different talents. So it's not always senior pastor so-and-so whose face is on all the content in the videos, but bringing some of the other guys in, maybe the youth pastor, and talk about relevant issues for young people, or bring the children's church in and the head of that and collaborating on that. You know, the women's ministry, that way you give a focus on some of the other ministries and you can actually build the ministries attendance, affinity, and so on. And then more powerful than that is outbound collaboration, where kind of what we're doing now. You're from, where are you from?
Minnesota.
So you're from Minnesota and I'm from South Africa. We're collaborating. And, you know, after this, we could possibly share this interview with some of our friends, etc. And that way, both of us get attention from places where we never would have been connected to or got exposure before. And so as ministries, you might have a strong prophetic ministry and someone else has a strong teaching ministry or leadership. And the two of you collaborating and bringing the two strengths together, what happens is the audience really benefits and they love that happening. And so those two involved in the collaboration gets exposure to the other audience or platform, and those are really, really powerful. Is there any of those that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I actually had written down inconsistency before you mentioned it, that our churches, a lot of churches, they post, they might post once one week and 4 times the next, and nothing the week after, and it confuses your audience, and they don't. People are far more likely to follow you if they know when you're going to show up. But I do think that a community is important and collaboration is important. One of the things that I think is a really neat idea is if you can find the places, the things that make your church unique, and capitalize on those. So for instance, the church that I'm working with right now, they have a Spanish service. And so I went to them and I said, okay, one of the most awesome things that you could do is have your pastor for your Spanish speaking service give devotionals and teaching live on the Facebook page.
Amazing.
And on Instagram, because then that's going to draw more of those people from the surrounding community, Spanish speaking people. And in terms of ministries and collaboration, what are the people, even if, now, I honestly think that we need to be looking outward, right? We need to be thinking of our churches as global ministries, because eventually that's what we're trying to do. But even if your church is looking more locally and wants to be more local, collaboration, it doesn't just have to happen within ministries. Figure out what your people, what your congregation are doing in their personal lives and how they're supporting their community, and talk about that. Bring them online to talk about their faith and their how the church has helped them, but also what they can do to reach people in their neighborhoods. So for instance, especially in these times, if you've got a financial planner in your congregation, bring them in to talk about the top things that people need to be aware of when they're unemployed, or when they're, how can people save money, or whatever. The church should not be there just to minister to spiritual needs. Churches also, we need to meet physical needs just like Jesus did, and we need to meet people where they're at. And sometimes where they're at, to be totally honest, they're not thinking about faith.
Right.
Sometimes people are thinking about, how am I going to put the food on the table tomorrow?
Exactly.
And if we can bring some of the people in our congregation who have those messages and things that can help, maybe you've got a mom of 6 in your congregation, and she can talk about how to keep a household running smoothly when everybody's home from school, and you've got, how to keep all of these working parts in order. And those are going to draw people to your church too.
So I just want to share another thought and idea for those that have been listening to you speaking about the Spanish pastor, maybe doing stuff, maybe to also reach that community. What they could do is, with their videos, if they have that, go and have the video translated into Spanish and put subtitles in the videos. That could be very, very effective to reach more people. Crystal, I've got about 6 minutes left, but I have 2 important questions that I still want to ask you that I think you could possibly still provide value on. Let's talk about, you mentioned earlier in the interview that you have untrained or unskilled hirelings, if you will. You want to use a biblical example. What is the value of the ministry going and investing in the development of people that might be unskilled or untrained? And if they show a passion for it and they've proven themselves through faithfulness, etc., to go and invest in training and development for them so they can upskill themselves and become more valuable, not just to the ministry, but also upskill themselves, and they feel a lot more self-value as well.
I think that's hugely important. one of the things that I would like to do is my my mission, my hope is that when I serve churches, I can help get them going, get everything up and running, and provide them with strategy, but also provide them with training. And I want to be able to take the people that they have and invest in them and show them how to do what I'm doing, so that eventually I'm working myself out of a job. I don't want to necessarily have the church always be paying me forever and ever and ever. And if that's what they want to do, then that's fine. But my hope, my goal would be that in time, um, their own people could be equipped to do what I'm doing for them, so that um, because it's their people have more passion for their church, and the communication is better, and ultimately at the end of the day, um, you know, I'm gonna love what I'm doing for them and to do the best that I can for them. But if you've got someone dedicated in house that can just really give their whole time to that ministry, that's going to be way better than anything else. And I think you absolutely have to invest in it, because again, it goes back to excellence. We don't not do something because we can't be excellent at it, but we have to continue to move towards excellence, because uh, people respond to that. That
I
makes sense.
deeply, yeah, I deeply believe in that. I feel as a coach, I don't want to spend more than 6 months with you as a ministry, because the objective here is for me to pass what I know over to your team, and that you are a media company slash a ministry, that you have a media department that's been developed in your ministry, and you are now able to continue the work that we've done together. And maybe I left behind skills, development, systems, processes, and you can run with it. And that way I feel that I'm effective in the body of Christ, because now I've left something behind. And so if I work with more ministries, so the impact becomes a lot more.
Right, right. And you're building a legacy, and that's important.
That's important, yeah. My last question to you, Crystal, is do you have any tips for a ministry that understands that, listen, I need to grow my team, because as a senior pastor, I can't do everything myself. It's never going to happen, because I have a lot of other things that I need to focus on. So I need to raise up volunteers. And so that is a very wise move. You know, I don't believe people always have to be paid that serve in the media team or the church communications group. It's good to have a coordinator that helps coordinate that team. But if a church wanted to grow their volunteer base that serves in their media team, or even any other ministry, what can they do to grow that?
Well, the first thing that I found is important is a personal ask. The one thing that I've learned is that if you just announce from the pulpit on Sunday morning, "Hey, I need people to do this," you're not going to get very many people to respond.
Wow.
So look around and find who's already doing aspects of that. Who is the social media butterfly in your congregation? Who's really great at writing, or who's really good at taking pictures or video, or has a good eye for color. You know, and maybe it's the gal who's always put together on Sunday morning and all of her clothes match. You know, who's doing that sort of thing well. And
Yeah.
then how can you plug them into those areas? You know, maybe that gal would make a really great graphic designer with a little bit of training, or even just a little bit of experience. Um, Now, I do believe in using volunteers, especially volunteers as social media ambassadors. You know, people that go online and share posts and like posts and engage with the community, um, and point people back to your church. I think that's huge, and that's definitely a great volunteer role. And then volunteers in media production and all of that, that's important. But I do think that you absolutely have to have somebody paid on staff working at least 20 hours to have a good online presence that is strategic, because as we mentioned before, too many volunteers makes everything, you have to have somebody steering the ship, and that person should be at staff meetings. They should know what they need to communicate. That's important.
Okay, Crystal, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. If people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Right now, they can find me on Facebook at Mosaic Social Media.
Okay. All right. And what are you doing there? What can they expect when they go to your page?
Honestly, it's brand new, so there's not much up there right now.
Okay.
But I do have content planned, and the audience for that page, the people that are going to be interested in it, are church ministry leaders, pastors that are just, they're overwhelmed and overworked, and they need tips on how to do this whole thing better, and with more consistency and more excellence.
Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Ministry Leader Show on Rainbow Gospel Radio, Missions Radio for the World, and we want to help you get your message to its intended for. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to my guest, Crystal. I really deeply appreciate it. Spending your morning with me and giving absolutely great value to the audience today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ivan, for having me. I appreciate it.